Uno de los principales desafíos científicos de nuestra época es entender el cerebro humano. Uno de los principales actores en esta empresa es el profesor LeDoux de la Universidad de Nueva York. Él ha sido pionero en el estudio de la emoción en animales y en los humanos. En este programa tenemos el privilegio de tener una entrevista con este distinguido colega desde su laboratorio de Nueva York. Why emotions are important?
Well, in many ways, we are our emotions. Our pleasures in life, our fears, our hopes, our dreams, everything important to us involves our emotions. So it's very important that we understand how these passions in us work. The ancient Greeks called emotions passions, and to this day we still think sometimes of our emotions as tying us to our animal ancestors, which they do. We have hunger and fear and sex drives and so forth. But at the same time, the emotions are also what make us unique in the animal kingdom, what makes us human. So the emotions are really everything. They are what tie us to our past as a species, but also what make us unique as a species. So they're very important that we understand how they work.
Among all emotions, why is fear particularly relevant?
Well, there's, any other emotional state besides fear can be postponed. So you can put off the pleasure of eating, the pleasure of sex, the pleasure of a nice bottle of wine. All of those things can be postponed until the appropriate time. But you can't ever postpone a situation where you're in danger. You have to respond to danger immediately, or there won't be anything else to respond to. So fear always pretty much trumps every other emotion. People do all sorts of risky things in terms of sexual behavior. They are aware of the possibility of getting AIDS, but yet they do things that might expose them to AIDS or other kinds of sexual diseases. So even though fear is dominant, there are other emotions that can come into play and override it from time to time.
How is your view about how emotions influence human decision-making?
Decision-making is a complex topic. We make some decisions through rational thought. We evaluate all the consequences. But oftentimes we make decisions unconsciously, and our brain makes decisions for us. And emotions will also play a contributing role there as well. So we may decide to perform some behavior, not because we've decided that that's the best thing to do, but because we're pulled in that direction by incentives and other kinds of emotional stimuli that work unconsciously and that set our brain into a state where different kinds of priorities are altered by the emotional arousal that's present. So one thing emotion and motivation do is they change priorities in the brain. They can raise the threshold for some priorities, lower the threshold for others. As you know well from your research in decision making, it's a very complicated process, and sometimes we oversimplify it by just simply calling it decision making.
Los invito a ver la segunda parte de la entrevista con el profesor LeDoux, en donde él nos cuenta una experiencia fascinante que están haciendo en su laboratorio, tratando de entender los mecanismos de la memoria y la emoción, que pueden inclusive llevar a mejorar una condición tremenda que afecta a mucha gente en nuestra sociedad, el estrés postraumático. What is the relationship between emotion and memory? Why emotions are important for us to recall things?
So in modern science now, we think of memory as not as a simple single thing, but as the operation of a lot of different systems in the brain. So there are different systems for our cognitive memory, and for our emotional memory, and for our memory of motor movements, like learning how to ride a bike and so forth, skilled movements. So there are different kinds of memory systems for different kinds of memory. Emotional memories, on the other hand, work unconsciously. They involve a different part of the brain called the amygdala, and they are triggered unconsciously, but simultaneously often with cognitive memories. So let's say you have an accident. You're driving down the road, you have an accident, and there's a loud sound of the horn, which has gotten stuck on during the accident. and you're in pain and bleeding, and everything is really bad. And later, maybe 2 or 3 days later, you hear the sound of a horn on the street. So that sound will go into your hippocampus and remind you of the accident, remind you where you were going, who you were with, what you were doing, and all of the factual details. At the same time, it will go to the amygdala and trigger an emotional response out of the amygdala. And the emotional response that's activated will modulate or enhance the perception of the cognitive memory. So these two systems interact. One is storing facts, one is storing emotional consequences, but when they're both reactivated at the same time by the same stimulus, then they interact so that the emotional system enhances the processing of the other. But even during the initial experience, the emotional arousal during that experience is going to strengthen that memory. So you're going to have a stronger memory about the accident than you would about the same place if you didn't have an accident there. So one thing that emotion does is it enhances or facilitates or solidifies the storage of memory, of cognitive memory.
What is next in your lab? What is next in the field of emotion?
Well, we've been doing a lot of research on trying to dampen or weaken emotional responses to memory. So a lot of people who are suffering, for example, from post-traumatic stress disorder or other kinds of intrusive memory problems are paralyzed by past memories of stressful events or traumatic events. So our rat research has given us clues as to about how we might be able to weaken these emotional memories. So we're not trying to erase memory in the big sense or in the usual sense of the word of the cognitive memory, but instead we're trying to erase or dampen the emotional component of the memory that I just described.